Shalom and welcome to Simchat Yisrael. This week's Brit Chadashah portion is chapter 11 of the book of John and recounts the famous story of the death and resurrection of Lazarus. Now we all know this story. Yeshua is with his disciples on the east side of the Jordan River when he receives news that his friend Lazarus is deathly ill. Despite nearly being stoned last time he was in Judea, Yeshua returns to Bethany to see his friend. But by the time he arrives, Lazarus has already died and his family is in mourning. Filled with compassion for them, Yeshua commands that the stone be rolled away from Lazarus' tomb. And then he calls, "Lazarus, come out!" And Lazarus walks out of his tomb alive and whole again. It's an amazing story, but there's one part that's always puzzled me. In verse 5, we read, "Now Yeshua loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. However, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days." Does that seem unusual to you? When I read the story and I hear that Lazarus is sick and dying, and that Yeshua loves him, and that Yeshua can save him, you expect Yeshua to just drop everything and just run to Bethany to save his friend's life. That's what Yeshua does. He's a rescuer, a deliverer. He always saves the day. But instead, when Yeshua gets the bad news, he just goes about his business. He doesn't get moving until 2 days later, after Lazarus has already died. Why did Yeshua delay? Why didn't he rush to his beloved friend's side in his hour of greatest need? The scriptures give us a partial answer in verse 14. When Yeshua tells his disciples that Lazarus has passed, he says, "Lazarus is dead. I'm glad for your sake I wasn't there, so that you may believe." Yeshua clearly has a goal here, something greater that he wants to accomplish. But what is it? He says that he wants his disciples to believe. Believe what? The answer may lie within the words of the Amidah prayer, the standing prayer of our people that observant Jews pray 3 times a day. Another name for Amidah is Shemoneh Esrei, which means 18. But the prayer actually has 19 blessings that are said during the week. An extra prayer was added, but the name was kept the same. Now on Shabbat, the prayer is abbreviated down to 7 blessings. But one prayer, which is always said, is called Gevorot, the second blessing of the Amidah, proclaiming the might of God. So this prayer takes special care to draw comparisons between God and the mortal king. Umi domelach, melech memit umchaye. Who compares to you, O king, who makes death and life? Any king has the power to kill and destroy, but only God has the power to create and restore life. This prayer is all about the power of God. He's called Baal Gevorot, the master of mighty deeds. Any ability that we possess, wealth, wisdom, physical power, it all comes from him. He is the source of all strength, and he has chosen to share some of that strength with us. In chapter 1 of Acts, Messiah Yeshua expands on this idea, and he tells his followers to wait and be open for the Holy Spirit to empower them to do the work of God. The Holy Spirit gives us the strength to work incredible miracles in God's name. We can do amazing things like heal and intercede and proclaim the good news of Messiah Yeshua. But as much strength as God gives us, Jewish tradition says that there is some power which God has reserved for himself. In Talmud Tractate Tanit, there is a long discourse about the Gevorot prayer. And the sages teach us that there are 3 keys maintained in the hand of the Holy One, blessed be he, which were not transmitted to an intermediary. In other words, there are 3 acts of power which are so great that God will not perform them through a messenger, like a prophet or a miracle worker, but which he only does by his own hand. The first of these miracles is that he alone causes the wind to blow and the rain to fall. The second is that God alone decides when children are conceived and born. And the third and greatest key is the focus of the Gevorot prayer itself. God alone has the power to bring the dead to life. Ezekiel 37 says, and you shall know that I am God when I open your graves. When we see the dead being restored to life, it will be such a great miracle that all humanity will be convicted that only God himself could be the one doing it. 3 keys of power held only in the hand of God himself. The book of John, more than any other of the Gospels, is about Yeshua establishing his messianic identity, not just as the messianic king from David's line, but establishing his divinity and his identity as God himself. The miracles that Yeshua performed were a witness to his identity. And throughout the Gospels, we see Yeshua take hold of all 3 of the keys of power. In Matthew 8, when a storm raged around them and all the disciples cowered in fear, Yeshua took command of the wind and the rains and he calmed the storm, something that only God was able to do. And the scriptures are filled with the tales of miraculous births, whether it be Sarah with Isaac, Rachel with Joseph, or Hannah with Samuel. But the story of Yeshua's miraculous birth in Luke 1 goes beyond even those stories and attests that Yeshua holds the key to creating life in his hand. And now, in John chapter 11, just a few days before he is to suffer, Yeshua's identity is still in question, maybe even among his own followers. In just the previous chapter, the Pharisees attempt to stone Yeshua, saying, "You, a mere man, are claiming to be God." How does Yeshua respond in the face of this doubt and distrust? He takes hold of the final key, the key of the resurrection of the dead. Yeshua hears that his friend Lazarus is sick, and part of him wants to run to Bethany and save his friend from suffering. Yeshua loved Lazarus. I can only imagine that Yeshua had to keep a strong face for those days, but when he finally arrives at the home of Mary and Martha, he could no longer contain his emotion. He was distraught, and he openly wept for his friend. Yeshua could have come in time and healed Lazarus, but instead, he stays where he is for 2 more days, stays until Lazarus has passed, so that when he does arrive, he can perform a miracle so astounding that no one who witnesses it can deny who Yeshua is. No one can deny that Yeshua is Emmanuel, God with us. Sometimes we cry out to God and we're disappointed when he doesn't come running to save us. We say, "Lord, I'm on my deathbed. If you are going to save me, now is the time." But sometimes God stays where he is for a few more days. He doesn't answer our prayer on our timeline because maybe, just maybe, he has a greater deliverance in store down the line. When that happens, we cannot give up hope. Yeshua loved Lazarus, and Yeshua loves us too. He weeps at our suffering, and though it may seem that he is coming too late, it is never too late for him to save us. Yeshua is the Baal Giverot, the master of might. Nothing is too great for him to accomplish. And just as he tells a heartbroken Martha, he is the resurrection and the life, and the one who believes in him will live, even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in him will never die. Shalom.